So today, on to the title of what I'd like to share about today is a triumphant return to peace. And since the beginning of the year, we have been focusing on our theme of to be a vessel for transformation. And what we've done is we have combined 12 New Thought principles along with 12 action steps from New Thought and combined them with the powerful teaching of the 12-step program, including the 12 steps along with the 12 promises. So today we look at the promise of the 12-step program, and step 4 is this is a tough month. I've made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is not a step for the faint of heart, as I've been reminding us each Sunday since April 3rd. So we're looking, last week we looked at the spiritual principle of courage, and now we'll look at the promise of we will know peace. So this is a step that is about coming face to face with our truths, our lives, our actions, and our behaviors. And it does take courage, and it is not for the faint of heart. This is an opportunity for us to become perfectly honest for all the times in our lives, as I've been saying for the last 2 weeks, that we have not magnified or amplified Spirit, God, our higher power, in our everyday lives, externally and internally. Is if we look at the times just in this last week, how many times did you have a thought internally that did not amplify your highest and best good, either about yourself or about another person? And did you have a moment or two where you were not amplifying, magnifying, expressing your higher power externally to others around you? Whether you have children, grandchildren, your co-workers, those people that maybe you commute with, ride on the bus with you, or at the grocery store. Was there a moment or two that maybe we weren't at our highest peak or level of expressing that goodness within us? Anybody have a moment? So that's what we're continuously on this spiritual journey, is to look at what does it take to reduce those moments that we're not amplifying our highest and best good internally and externally. And that's why this is not for the faint of heart. Because it takes a courageous person to be willing to look morally inside and examine those moments over a lifetime where we have not always been at our highest and best good. And what those moments can serve us as we begin to shift our perspective and heal the energy around them, is they serve us as examples of what we don't want to keep doing. And we can learn from those in assisting us in continuing to expand our awareness of how magnificent we are on the inside. And so what we want to look at today then is, I think, the 3 big spiritual principles out there are love, peace, and joy. So we're going to look at one of the most important, and maybe for our world, the most current important spiritual principle that we need to exemplify and magnify a little more in the consciousness of our earth. Do you agree? Because listen to this. At last calculation, in the past 3,500 years, there have been a total of 230 years of world peace. This number, of course, is cumulative and not consecutive. If you take that in for a moment, 93.5% of the time, we as human beings have been at war with each other. Not only does that tell us how lofty the wishes of all the Miss Americas have been. You always know that when they ask them, what's your vision? What is it that you want for the world peace? World peace. But it also says something rather profound about humanity. War seems to be the natural state of being. So what if what we see out here in our external world, the conflict, the disagreements, the fighting, the destruction, the war, is really an outpicturing of the inner war, the inner conflicts that humanity has collectively and individually going on? Because if you think for a moment, if we're at total peace within ourselves, do we want to war and harm others? So if we get collectively, and it only takes a few in the right positions to cause a war to happen. See, personally, I have no conflict with if you live in Afghanistan or Iraq. I have no conflict with those people at all. Because why? What's inside of them is what's inside of me, and there's an equal amount of what's inside of me as what's inside of them. And I'm not honoring that in any way if I'm out to destroy that. So where we want to grow then collectively and consciously, which is, whenever I use the word conscious, you understand that's the sum total of our thoughts and feelings and beliefs. So where we want to grow is in the sum total of our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, starting individually, is that we are at peace, that we don't have any warring conflicts taking place inside of us. Have you had that battle, that warring conflict? I'm a good person. No, I'm not. I need to lose weight. No, I'm fine, just the way I am. I'm hungry. No, you're not. You ate last week. You know that warring conflict that we have going in? I'm lovable. No, I'm not. I'm happy. No, I'm not. You get enough of that going on, and pretty soon you get a pretty good conflict going on. And then what happens before long? You start looking externally for ways to calm that internal conflict. And then what do? We go to the doctor. Can you give me a pill to calm it? Or we go to the liquor store. Can I get a bottle here to calm it? Or the multitude of 170 other addictions that we have created in order to numb that internal conflict. So you tell me how important peace is. And where we first must find it is within ourselves. And to want to be on that journey of finding internal peace is not a journey for the faint of heart. Because it means being willing to do a personal and moral inventory to look at all the reasons that we may be in conflict with living at peace within ourselves. Because if we cannot live at peace within ourselves, we cannot live a peaceful external life. How many of us have thought that we need to shift our life around us on the outside, and that will bring peace within us? Well, didn't that flow really nicely? See, some would argue that war is a possible reaction between two opposing ideologies, states that occur to create a new understanding. Is there any place inside of you where you may have two opposing ideologies running? And they're running parallel to each other, and as they're running parallel to each other, they're taking pokes back and forth. Have you ever had that where then, as I stated earlier, that part of us that says, I'm worthy, and then the other part that says, no, you're not. I'm a good person. No, you're not. And it's kind of like we go along, and here's the thought saying, I'm not good, and the other part saying, I'm good, and our part that's saying, I'm not good, keeps hitting on the part that's good within you. And before long, you feel beat up on the inside. And that's what does not give us peace of mind, is when we go to bed at night and our head is spinning so fast from all that internal dialogue going on that we can't find even a moment of peace while we go to sleep. And often we sleep the whole night restless, spending it restless. And we can't go into that deep needed theta consciousness of sleep. Part of being human is being on an eternal search for peace of mind. Much like the man, and see if you've ever been this person, whether I'm saying man or woman, we're talking about us as humans, much like the man who after many years of living in a large metropolitan area and all the busyness and the crowds and the hustle and bustle and the early bird gets the worm and the continuous aggression to be at the top of the chain. And so what he decided to do is that he knew that he needed to move out into the middle of nowhere. Anybody ever thought that's where you'll find peace? That cabin out in the middle of the woods with nobody around? That's what he did. So he packed up what he thought he needed with him, and he got rid of the rest of his belongings. Can you imagine if you had to do that? How many got like a lot of belongings? That would take a long time to go through that search to clean it all out. And he moved and he purchased a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest sign of civilization, because he felt for sure that being out in the middle of nowhere would give him peace. because he couldn't find peace in that busy, thriving hustle and bustle of the metropolis that he was living in. After being there in that cabin in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization, within 3 weeks he was bored. Bored beyond his coping skills to be that alone with himself. So he thought he'd compromise. And he picked up his belongings and moved to a smaller town as a compromise. And within 3 weeks, he was bored beyond his coping skills. You know the rest of the picture. Why? Because peace is not an external job. Peace is an inside job. How many of us think that if we're in a relationship or when we've been in a relationship, one way that we can find a greater amount of peace is to go on vacation? If we just go somewhere. No offense, Karen and Bob. Hey, they've been together for, 33 years now? 33 years, they're all right. But a couple from Winnipeg decided to go to Florida to thaw out during a particularly icy winter. They planned to stay at the same hotel where they spent their honeymoon 20 years earlier. Because of hectic schedules, it was difficult for them to coordinate their travel schedules. So the husband left Winnipeg and flew to Florida on Thursday, with his wife flying down the following day. The husband checked into the hotel and found that there was a computer in his room. So he decided to send an email to his wife. However, he accidentally left out one letter in her email address, and without realizing his error, sent the email. Meanwhile, somewhere in Houston, a widow had just returned from her husband's funeral. He was a minister, her husband was a minister who was called home following a heart attack. The widow decided to check her email, expecting messages from relatives and friends. After reading the first message, she screamed and fainted. The widow's son rushed into the room, found his mother on the floor, and saw the computer screen, which read, "To my loving wife. Subject, I've arrived." Date, November 16th, 2010. I know you're surprised to hear from me. They have computers here now, and you are allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've just arrived and have been checked in. I've seen that everything has already been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey is as uneventful as mine was. P.S. Sure is freaking hot down here. Check those email addresses carefully before you send them. So last week I asked you, the question is, what would happen if we had the courage to unwrap ourselves from the lies that we have enshrouded ourselves within? Such as the lies of, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I need your approval to feel okay about myself. What would it be like to unwrap ourselves? Because our lies have become inhibitors, first and foremost, in developing our relationship of oneness with God and then ourselves. I want you to really hear that one again. And if you're put off a little bit by the word lie, just say false truths. Our lies become inhibitors, first and foremost, in developing our relationship of oneness with God and then ourselves. So I ask you, what lies have we told ourselves about our relationship in spirit with our higher power? Such as, I'm not worthy of God's love. How many of us, if we do, or when we do our moral inventory of ourselves, look at it and we feel shame? My God, I can't believe I've ever done that to myself or to others. I feel so ashamed. And if that's how I've been magnifying and amplifying God in my life, how could I feel worthy of God's love? Oh man, that's a heavy burden to carry. I cannot have a deep and meaningful relationship with something I feel less than. See, that's where we project often our parental relationship, the relationship that we had with our parents, we projected onto our relationship with that higher being, that higher energy. So you see, if we didn't feel like we were worthy of our parents' love because they didn't express it enough, they didn't validate it enough, they didn't touch us, they didn't spend enough time with us, they didn't nurture us, all those sort of things, because then we start thinking there's something wrong with us. So if there's something wrong with us, then there's no way that God can love us unconditionally, because there's something wrong with us, and God doesn't love things that there's something wrong with. That's a lie we tell ourselves. I have nothing to give back to God, and I don't know how to be in a relationship with anyone or anything that I cannot give to. If you're a giver, having a relationship in God, and I'm not talking about a balanced giver, I'm talking about one that only knows how to give. And you give and give and give with the hopes of what you'll receive in return is somehow approval or acceptance or unconditional love from someone else. And what happens when we have that type of approach to our relationship in God is what we end up doing is we end up interjecting our codependent relationship and behaviors with each other into our relationship with God. Oh, to become codependent on God. Thinking and believing that regardless of whatever we've done in our life somehow impacts God. Really? Really? This is why we want to do a fearless and moral inventory of ourselves. When we turn inside and we ask God to forgive us for everything on our list, everything. I want you to understand there is nothing that any of you can put down on your moral and inventory list that God cannot forgive you for. Because God, that's believing that God is like other people and holds things against you. This is a tough one sometimes for our collective consciousness to really grasp and accept as our truth. God does not hold anything against you. Anything. And if there's that part of your mind that says, yes, He does. Yes, God does, because of whatever you've been taught or whatever's been shoved down your throat or whatever you have falsely misread, saying that God holds things against you, then we've missed the mark. God doesn't hold one thing against you. So when we turn inward and we ask God to forgive us for everything on our list, this is what allows us to step outside the shadow of lies that we have built up on the inside of us around our higher power. You will begin, and as you do this, placing that moral inventory list, and then beginning to say to yourself, and this is how we grow in our faith in God. God, forgive me for every time I've missed the mark, for every time I've mistreated myself, harmed myself, or I've harmed others, or mistreated them, or misspoken. And we keep praying, and you will never hear a voice inside of you in speaking through your intuition, through your higher senses that will say, nope, can't forgive you for that one. You're never going to hear it. Never. There has never been one spiritual teacher that I've ever read, studied, heard about that has ever said that energy that is within us, that is a part of the everlasting wholeness, will hold anything against us. You will begin to remember the incarnated truth that God is bigger than any and all lies that we've ever told ourselves and others. There is something inside of you that knows that God is bigger than any and all lies that we've ever told ourselves and others. This is where we get to strengthen our faith, which was our spiritual principle in step 3 of our program this year. So what if God doesn't forgive us? If you have that thought for a moment, that's once again our projecting our codependency into our relationship with our higher power. Because you see, we may have had people that we've done things to in our life that are on that list that they may, won't, or can't forgive us for whatever reason. And that's their choice. Forgiveness is a choice on a human level. But on a spiritual level, it's never a choice, because there's never anything that any of us have ever done that God is going to choose not to hold it against us. But when we say, okay, I've done something and I feel so bad about it, I know that I can never be forgiven for it. No, it may be a challenge for others to forgive you for what you've done, or for you to forgive yourself. It's never a challenge for a higher power to forgive us. Never. And that should right now just be warming your heart. That should just be melting that stress and that anxiety that we carry inside of us. It's that same stress and anxiety that many of us have carried, that have carried for generations within us. Perhaps the people that you've heard won't or can't, but Spirit holds not one thing against us. The energy of God that is inside of you will right the risk and uncertainty that you may have inside of you, and will transform you and any false truths that you've ever told yourself and others into a truth teller. And that will be a miracle greater than the raising of the dead. That transformation to going from somebody that tells ourselves or others false truths, when we can transform that to become a real teller of the truth. That we can tell each other how we think and feel. That we can tell ourselves the truth of how we think and feel about ourselves, which are we are loving divine beings, expressing the fullness of Spirit in a multitude of ways, through our love, through our peace. But what we find instead is that many people have become tenacious when it comes to the treasure of their imaginary independence. We have become tenacious in protecting the treasure of our imaginary independence. We hold and hoard our sicknesses with a firm grip. We find our identity in our brokenness and guard it with every ounce of strength we have. Have any of you protected a wound with every ounce of strength you have? If I had $10 for every time I've dealt with a person that has carried a childhood wound with them for more than 30 or 40 years, I would be financially retired. That's protecting something with every ounce you have. And somehow we believe that by protecting it, that makes us into who we are. That we feel we need to do that, and we will protect and hoard that thing with all we got. If any of you watch, there's about 2 different shows out there right now that are on the hoarders. And almost every one of them is really out-picturing and collecting all that stuff, some emotional trauma that they went through, whether it's a divorce, a loss of a loved one, and much of it occurs in their adult lives. And what that traumatic event does is it simply triggers something that had been held within them and brings it out, and it becomes active. And so before long, they put their families in debt. They create an unhealthy environment to live in. And what if that is all just an out-picturing of the trauma and the pain and the hurt that is on the inside? And it's just another way that they're trying to anesthetize that pain. But boy, we'll protect that secret and hoard it and keep it within, not realizing the damage and the struggle that we have, because there's that one part of you that keeps going, no, let it out. Heal this stuff. Quit carrying it with you. The longer you carry it with you, the more that we harm ourselves and we harm those around us with it. No wonder grace has such little attraction to those of us that want to hoard and hold on to our wounds and hurts. In this sense, we have tried to lock the door to our hearts from the inside. Have you ever been in a relationship where it is apparent that the other person has locked their door of love, and they can't let it out, and you can't get in it? Have you ever been in a relationship with somebody that you want them to love you really bad, whether it was with you, starting with your parents, or it's been now with your children, or wherever it's shown up, and you really want them to love you, and you're doing everything you can to get inside where you feel like there is a mutual agreement to love, and you can't get inside? It's because they've locked the door to their inner heart and to their love from the inside. How many of us have taken the same approach with God? And we put a lock on our inner door, and so it has become difficult for God's love, compassion, and empathy to get out of us. How many of us have moments or weeks or sometimes months and years that go between where we really offer sincere compassion and empathy, where we get out of thinking that the world just revolves around our own doingness, and we have a hard time putting ourselves in other people's shoes? Compassion, the definition of it, is accepting someone unconditionally right where they are without any need or desire to want to change them in any way. And when we're not practicing that on a regular basis, perhaps we have locked that inner door of which God's love pushes through. So you see, continuously what we're about here on this spiritual journey, and this is for the courageous, those of you that are so courageous, which is every one of you here today. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. We are working on unlocking that door so that that love and that compassion and that empathy, which are to me the three highest forms of unconditional love that we can express, are continuously coming through us to the best of our abilities and skills, and that we're looking to improve those in every way that we can. So what we're always doing on our spiritual journey is working to make sure those doors stay open as possible. The overcoming of the usual barriers between the individual and the absolute is the great mystic achievement. In mystical states, we both become one with the absolute. We become aware of our oneness. It is not the nature of God's love to force a relationship, but it is the nature of Spirit to open the way. So how do we open the way? We make that list. We begin that process of forgiving ourselves for any misdeeds that may be on that list. And in doing so, we strengthen and deepen automatically that inner relationship with our higher self, higher power. And believe it or not, this is the exactly what the 2,000-year-old story and symbology of what Palm Sunday is. When we decide to remove the inner locks chaining our hearts to false perceptions, all Spirit knows is to welcome us in. Hosanna to the Most High. And it will be a royal welcome, but we must open this door with the most humbling of consciousness. God, forgive me for what I have done. When we ride directly through the resistance of an addiction, a bad habit or behavior, and we triumph over the fear of having to give up what we clung to so tightly, we will then find the pure state of peace. Our false self is the doorway through which we enter. And when we exit on the other side, we will have triumphed over the evils of humanity's false will, which is any form of separation of duality. All the people in the video I'm about to show, or Dre's about to show you, represent the thoughts, the beliefs, and the hurts and pains that perhaps for years or even decades have been keeping out our higher self. So I want you to think of Palm Sunday as the day that Jesus enters into Jerusalem. And what happens is there's a laying down of palm fronds, which is the symbol or a reminder or a act that is only given to royalty. But what is royalty within you? What is royalty? It's your highest and most precious, majestic self. That's your royalty. And at times, there's all these voices that are making so much commotion that royalty cannot find way or a path or a route through that sometimes chaotic, stress, anxious-induced thought processes that we live a lot of our time in. But when we enter into that state of the most exalted, but we do it humbly, then what happens is we find those things that are less than those of our higher and most exalted self will end up moving out of the way and making room for our divinity to ride through and triumph over our false self. Here's the example of what this story is about.
He raised Lazarus from the dead!
Who is this Jesus of Nazareth?
He's a prophet. A great prophet.
A prophet? On a donkey?
Listen to the healing of the sick! You have come to deliver us! Jesus of Nazareth, King of the
Isaiah said, Jerusalem, daughter of Zion, behold thy king cometh unto thee, humble and meek.
Son of David! Master, you are the hope of Israel! You are our prophet and our savior! Jesus the prophet, save us! Bless us, Master! Heal me, Master! Heal
So what that is an outward to me, an outward picture of, the symbology of, is whenever we see in the Bible many people, many or towns or villages of people, it's representing a multitude of thoughts. It's an outpicturing of all those thoughts. And if your most highest and precious self was to mount a donkey, which means to approach something humbly, that's the symbology there. If your divinity approached those questioning, negative, hurtful, painful thoughts, those doubting thoughts, those questioning thoughts that say, who are you to think you are a divine expression of spirit having a human experience? Do you have any thoughts in there that question it? Who is he? The one that raised the dead. They're questioning, who are you? Do you have any thoughts that question that part of you that wants to ride through those thoughts and conquer them, that says, what do you think you are? You are less than. You are not as good as. You are not as magnificent as you believe you to be. Look what you've done. What today is about is laying those thoughts aside and making a pathway through which our higher self can emerge and ride triumphantly over, through, and conquer those limiting thoughts that lock our inner door to not only God's love, but inhibit our ability to express our human love to each other. We are the architects of our fate. And by living one day at a time, we gain experience, strength, and hope to live on life's terms. We accept the things we cannot change and the courage to confront the ultimate reality of what we can change. Changing is a process that starts within the heart and mind, and then it enters the soul. And it comes forth through our decisions. We decide who we are and what we want. We define our current reality. We choose to decide how we feel, how we act, think, and behave. how we respond and what road to travel, who to call our friends, what goals to set, and how to allocate the circumstances that come our way. We are in charge through our higher power of creating that perfect pathway of which we can ride triumphantly through, conquering all thoughts of less than. Of less than. And when we do that, we find that state of peace, and we carry it into our days, into our relationships, into our friendships, and into our greater understanding of who and what we are. We are here to be those translucent presences through which God's peace manifests. May we pray.